letters, and we talked about it on the phone. But how you really feel about it, I don't really know.
What's your take on Cassavetes? 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 Misogynist. Genius. Misogynist. Genius. Misogynist. Genius. Misogynist. Genius. What's your take on Cassavetes? What's your take on Cassavetes? What's your take on Cassavetes?
Hello, and welcome to There's Sometimes a Buggy, Irresponsible Opinions About Classic Film. I'm Elise.
I'm Dave. This week, we begin Season 2 of the Acteur Oeuvre-view.
Sounds like you're trying to get something out of your gorge when you say that.
Oeuvre-view.
That's just my anti-francophone sentiment.
Yeah, I think so. I think you have to broaden your horizons. And we are broadening our horizons by undertaking quite a mission here. We're going to go through all of the extant and subtitled films of Setsuko Hara. We're starting out with a couple of films that came out on either side of World War II.
This is a really strange pairing and a very interesting one and a completely accidental one.
Ideal, though, I think.
Yeah.
Before we get started, though, well, we're going to be talking about, I guess the translation is The Samurai's Daughter, 1937, and then No Regrets for Our Youth, 1946. But before we get into those films, I guess we'll talk just for a little while about Setsuko Hara herself, what we know about her, which isn't a whole lot.
And if you go to the very end of the podcast episode, I have been doing further research in the wake of our last Acteurist Oeuvre-view series, and I have found some secondary and primary sources on Selznick and Jennifer Jones, and I'm going to be releasing this information live to Dave. We have not discussed it previously because I want to get his reactions on mic.
We're going to have some timestamps, as we always do, so if you're really interested in the Jennifer Jones, David Selznick saga, that will continue at the end of this episode. But first, Setsuko Hara. What is your experience with her, Elise? And what do you know about her?
Oh, well, I mean, I guess I first saw her in late spring.
Yes, me too.
I saw that movie before you did.
That's right.
It was just playing by itself at TIFF. It wasn't part of any retrospective. For some reason, you couldn't come to it that day. You were writing or something. It was my first Ozu, and I thought it was magnificent, obviously. And I came home and I said, I'm not going to tell you anything about this, because I don't want to spoil it in any way. Because this is actually a film that you should experience for yourself, and I don't think there's anything I can say about it, though we'll see if I've changed my mind when we actually do it as part of this series.
Yeah, that's coming up in a couple of months.
But just rest assured that Ozu is just as great as everyone has been saying that he is all of these years that we heard about. You had seen A Silent, though, hadn't you? Hadn't you seen A Silent,
yes,
Ozu?
Tokyo Chorus.
Then that was your only experience.
Great, but it was nothing at all like his post-war films.
And then you and I, together, after you saw Late Spring and Early Spring, a couple of them that were playing at TIFF, after you saw them, we decided together, because we weren't going out to as many movies at that time as we would just before the pandemic.
Yeah.
We decided to watch a whole bunch of the Ozus, the post-war Ozus at home together. And that's when we really got into Ozu and Setsuko Hara, and then that became further enriched when we went together to the Summer in Japan series that TIFF did a couple of summers ago, was that?
Yeah.
We became familiar with more Japanese directors and watched some more things at home and saw her in a couple of other directors' films, including this one.
Right. So she is primarily associated in the public's mind now, so much as she is associated with anything, or people know her. They definitely think of her as an Ozu actress.
Well, especially in the West.
Well, that's what I mean, of course.
Although I think also probably in Japan as well.
Film career goes well beyond just the films with Ozu. She worked with a lot of other interesting auteurs, And she worked with a lot of people who don't have any kind of reputation as auteurs, so we're mixing in everything we possibly can watch. Many of them are things we haven't seen yet. I think it's going to be really interesting to see what she brings to all of these different projects.
Now, her filmography would not be manageable for us to do if it weren't for certain features of international availability.
So many of her early films, especially, I just can't find them. There are a couple I was able to find that have no subtitles, and that doesn't help us at all, unfortunately.
We're not even glancingly familiar with Japanese.
No, I wish I was, but it's not going to happen. We do have a good 20 to 25 films to cover, though, so I think that is perfect.
At the beginning here is where you're going to really see the gaps, and it's quite a gap from our first to our second film here, but that turned out to be very culturally interesting.
Tiny bit of backstory that I absorbed today. I watched a little French documentary on Setsuko Hara. It was called Setsuko Hara La Disparue.
The disappearing?
The disappeared.
Somebody disappeared her?
Well, she's the Greta Garbo of Japan. Setsuko Hara retired in her mid-40s, right after Ozu died. She was basically never seen again in public anyway, and she lived on for another 50 years. Fans were clamoring to have her back over those decades. It absolutely never happened. People just kept hoping there would be something that would entice her back. Didn't happen.
Which is similar to our last actress, Jennifer Jones, in that she also retired in her mid-40s, basically.
Yeah, but she didn't become a complete isolato.
Well, more or less. She refused almost completely to do interviews. She did get remarried and work on her mental health foundation, so she had a project that she was working on.
It's true, both of them were not seen on camera anymore, really.
Or really in the public eye.
But Setsuko Hara, as far as people know anyway, just didn't see anyone.
Or like Garbo, other than Gore Vidal and Cecil Beaton, she didn't see anybody.
There was a lot of speculation on the nature of her relationship with Ozu.
Interestingly, and this has like no correspondence as far as, like, I can't think of any in Hollywood history, that nobody seems to have identified any lovers for either of them.
Right.
Although there's speculation about maybe the two of them, but even that appears to be just complete speculation.
They really hit hard on it whenever there's any kind of biographical material.
Is it a culture that's just better at keeping stars' private lives private? Or is it a culture where sometimes people just don't have any private lives? Which, again, occasionally that happened in the 19th century with writers, but that's about the only comparison I can think of.
Well, I don't really know. She does many of her movies focus on
her rejection of a sort.
Her renunciation.
Renunciation. So, yeah, James is who I was alluding to in terms of people not having private lives. Henry James again. And there's certainly a theme of Jamesian renunciation in some of her Ozu movies.
She may be the Henry James of Japan, yes.
Her and Ozu, other than the fact that Ozu was apparently drunk all the time.
Yeah, they're Henry...
Like, literally all of the time.
They were both Henry Jameses. And it's amazing they got to work together. Two Henry Jameses working together is the only thing better than one Henry James working on something.
Wow. You're not going to hear that on any other podcast anytime soon?
Really, none of that has anything to do with either of the movies we're talking about today. Because that Ozu persona, it comes and goes. And even within the Ozu film, she has a bunch of different moods and approaches to life, as we'll see. But these films, she's playing much more active characters.
I guess, in a way. Certainly in the Kurosawa. I thought the Kurosawa was actually very interesting in terms of her persona.
Oh, yeah.
I think it did hit a couple of notes that are important. A lot of this is going to be speculative, and it's not going to be as thorough as our Jennifer Jones and some of our later Acteurist Oeuvre-views, because we're just going to have so many films missing, which leads you to ask questions like, like when we did our Jimmy Stewart episode last time, how many films of an actor with a large filmography do you need in order to say that you've really grasped their screen persona?
Yeah. Well,
do you need all of them? Do you need the important ones? Are you sure you know what the important ones are?
A lot of the ones that are missing are propaganda films made during World War II. So at least we've got one film that is most definitely in that category here.
Let's start talking about it.
I guess her second credit and her first starring role, it seems.
Yes, yeah, that does seem to be the case.
Samurai's Daughter. She was apparently 15 when she was cast for it. Anyway, she's 17 in 1937 when the movie came out. She became a huge international sensation based on this film. It was a German, and this is Nazi Germany, you have to remember, German-Japanese co-production.
And the Japanese are they already in full fascist mode at this time?
Sure.
Sure, okay. Well, because they're talking about sending people, the whole movie, a lot of the propaganda is based on sending settlers to Manchuria.
The Sino-Japanese war has been going on, and that just melded into World War II.
So what we've got here is a propaganda film made early, like prior to World War II.
Prior to World War II, but not prior to Japanese involvement in a war.
German fascism. Then we have a post-war film that is, we might as well call it Marxist.
We can talk about that. Yeah,
sure,
to some extent, anyway.
Close enough, renouncing this same involvement.
I was definitely renouncing the involvement, for sure. I don't know.
And making a hero and a martyr of the people who were condemned as spies for objecting to exactly this. The protests in No Regrets for Our Youth are based on opposing Japanese action in Manchuria.
Yeah. Setsuko Hara herself is whisked off to Germany. She's at the premiere in Berlin and is cheered by crowds.
That's what you learn in your documentary.
The hit of the universe, apparently. And all of the people back home in Japan can't believe that this is all happening.
Japanese film industry has been going on for a long time at this point. So she's not like one of the earliest stars. It's not like Mary Pickford or Lillian Gish or...
No, but she is the it girl from that moment onward, it appears. She doesn't just stay in Germany. She winds up being taken under the wing of Julien Duvivier.
Okay.
Who takes her to America, and she hangs out in Hollywood.
What could she do in Hollywood, though? Anime Wong roles? That's no good.
We don't know what would have happened, but they showed her in the documentary. They showed pictures of her hanging out with Marlene Dietrich, going all over the place.
And she's like a teenager.
Yeah. She's recalled to Japan because things have stepped up in terms of the wartime situation, and she's forced into propaganda films. So she never got a chance to make any movies in Hollywood, but apparently this is something that Duvivier was pushing for. It's too bad that didn't happen. It would have been interesting as well.
So let's talk about these two directors of this film.
Yes, what do you know about these?
They have only very brief entries in Wikipedia. Our source, our primary source. On-the-fly source, sometimes later backed up by more detailed research, usually not. So the two directors are the German directors Arnold Fanck and the Japanese directors Mansaku Itami. Apparently there were two slightly different versions of this film produced for each market.
Makes sense. The version that we saw was the German.
It's definitely the German one. They're speaking German, and there's German voiceovers and etc. As I was watching this, I was like, this seems like a Japanese version of the German mountain film genre, in which Leni Riefenstahl rose to fame, which gave her her opportunity to become a director.
Yeah, and this guy was involved in that as well.
No. He is the guy.
Yeah, exactly.
This is the guy who invented the mountain picture genre. The reason I know about this, I get to tell the story. The reason I know about this, and I bet I have told this story in the podcast before, but I don't think in the film version of it, is because my ex-husband, Guy Madden, in the 80s, made a very low-budget Canadian film called Careful that was tongue-in-cheekily paying homage to the German mountain film genre.
Right.
Because in the 80s it was, funny to make fascist references.
Oh, God.
It's a very campy film. It's very good, too. Someone showed it to Leni Riefenstahl, and she sent him a fan letter. And at this point, nobody in the world, this was his second feature, nobody in the world knew who he was, but Leni Riefenstahl sent him a fan letter telling him, how much she appreciated him reviving this glorious genre of the mountain picture.
Oh, boy.
So it's considered proto-fascist because of its glorification of the will as man and woman exercise their spirit and strength against the mystical glory of nature, etc., etc.
Yeah, for sure.
Here, instead of a mountain, we have a volcano.
Even better.
Even better, right? Now, from the very brief entries on these two directors, particularly brief is the Japanese director's entry. It seems plausible that neither of them were entirely comfortable with fascism.
Right.
And I don't know about you, but watching it, I certainly felt there was room in it for there to be a subversive reading of it.
I really enjoyed the movie, I have to tell you. It's quite involving, and I don't feel like there's any contradiction between that and condemning the purpose, the overall Ministry of Propaganda purpose.
Blatant propaganda sections throughout the entire film. Mansaku Itami says here about him in his entry, his samurai films diverge from the norm in that they were not heroic epics of the sort which had by that time become formulaic, but rather satires that used the established symbols and iconography of the samurai culture to comment on both historical and modern society. So that is what makes me think that he knew something about manipulating familiar or conventional imagery in order to produce something subversive. But I don't know, because I know nothing about this director's other films.
Right.
But, right, and
Fanck got into trouble in Germany too, right? He was sort of doing this as a penance or something?
yeah, he was doing this as a penance because he wouldn't join the Nazi party.
Right, well, good on him.
No, maybe he did later, but initially he refused to join, and one of his mountain pictures at this point had a French hero, was set in the French mountains, and had a Jewish producer. So that's what got him in trouble, and he had to do this film as penance.
That would have been a big problem from the German High Command's point of view. Everyone knew they were going to go to war with France at some point.
In terms of style, this was an almost hyperactively inventive film.
Oh, it was beautifully shot.
Yeah, there were lots of really gorgeous aesthetic shots. There was also a lot of restless inventiveness that actually reminded me of early talkies, where there's sound, but there's also a lot of visual inventiveness of silent cinema.
Yep.
And there are such long montage sequences throughout this film that at times it was like a silent movie.
Flashbacks, those were really key montages.
Oh, which one are you thinking of?
Well, like where she is lying in bed, remembering all of the things that she's gone through in order to prepare herself to be the perfect wife.
Yes, which involves
fencing, even.
Well, which involves both mental and physical discipline. You can't say enough that every single sequence in this movie is devoted to, it seems primarily in this German version at least, devoted to showing how picturesquely fascinating Japanese culture is, and at the same time, fundamentally exactly the same as fascist German culture. Since they too love their arbitrary rituals and customs, they too love their land and their ancestry, they too sacrifice the individual for the good of that, the nation and their ancestry.
Their strength is their willingness to subordinate individual will to the collective.
And there's this fascinating dialogue, like literally a dialogue going on. Let's set the scene so that we know who the players are in this dialogue.
First, we start with some shots of natural splendor of Japan. We see mountains right away. We see blossoms. And
all of these hyper-aestheticizing shots I want to attribute to Fanck, but I have no idea. I did see some of his mountain films. Guy showed me some, but I don't really remember them very well.
Sublime nature is in the spotlight at first, but then we move into a more prosaic setting of a poor family getting a telegram. Here we have shades of the human comedy, although it's earlier than the human comedy, where the mother says, "I don't like telegrams." And the guy says, "Well, sometimes they're good. Sometimes there's good news in them."
And she's already had a discussion with her little daughter about the brother that went away when you were still inside my tummy.
Yeah, and it is good news. The brother is coming home. The prodigal is returning. Everyone is rejoicing. The older sister, she works in a factory. She goes around telling everyone she's so happy her brother's coming home.
Did you like that later sequence of what a joyful, happy time all the girls in the factories have, scrubbing their little faces and singing their work songs before bed?
Subordinating their individual desire to the will of the collective, the production line. Everybody's really happy about this. Then we switch over to the brother. We get a look at what he's all about. He is lounging around on this world liner.
He's really schlubby looking, too.
He's scruffy. He looks like, a guy who's been enjoying 8 years in the German beer halls and academia, learning all kinds of things.
And he's having a philosophical discussion about life and nationhood with a Aryan goddess in mannish attire.
Yes, so this is his school friend. She's a journalist. She accompanies him because she wants to submit a story on this great journey this man has had, going to the West, imbibing its culture for 8 years, and then returning home to be useful to his countrymen in Japan.
But also because they've been sleeping together for 8 years.
Yeah, they've been having an affair. It can go no further because he's already promised in marriage to the daughter of the samurai.
Because he has been adopted by the family, so they have this discussion about why this is done in Japanese culture. And how he has to actually take the father's name, and so his wife's name. We've actually seen this before in the Makioka sisters.
Yes.
Which is apparently based on, there was an 80s version that we saw at TIFF.
It was an incredible movie, yeah.
It was very great, and it was based on one of the most popular novels in Japan of all time.
I want to read it.
Either there is a translation in print, or
there must be.
Yeah, I think there is, for sure. I've got it on my list.
That's his story. He was plucked out of obscurity, and he's become the scion of this very wealthy, very prestigious family, and he's going to be married to his stepsister.
He keeps calling her his sister.
Yeah.
Like they call each other sister and brother. It's creepy.
It is.
And
they're going to produce kids with the right last name. Right family name.
And then he's talking about the Aryan goddess, who, by the way, is very likable in this
She
movie.
really is.
Really is. She keeps talking about, he is saying that being in the West has made him learn about the importance of individual freedom, and she keeps questioning this, whether it's really such a great thing as he thinks it is, because of course she's speaking for the fascists, who, as much as they love the West and progress and Europe and think all those things are great, at the same time want people to give up their individual freedom for authoritarianism.
Yeah, so this is part of an internal struggle within Germany as well. Presumably, he's been there for 8 years. The movie comes out in 1937, so at least some of that time, it's not exactly clear. Yeah, it probably is 1937. It probably is meant to be ripped from the headlines. He's coming home in 1937. But he was there before the Nazis took power, so a lot of the time that he was studying, he was learning decadent Weimar individualism. So everybody's got to shift gears. As you say, she is very sympathetic fascist.
We do know that the Nazis were very conservative in terms of gender, but I have never, other than Riefenstahl, I've never seen a narrative propaganda film from this time period before, and therefore I don't know how women are generally represented in Nazi propaganda narrative films, or if this is just Fanck who really liked this type of more Western style female. Who knows?
It's hard to say.
Because obviously Riefenstahl was doing that in his films before she became the monster that she is.
Seen Triumph of the Will, I've seen Olympiad, but that's it, and those are not...
They're not narrative.
No, I haven't seen, but there
also,
were...
I'm not sure. I think there might be a couple of women in Olympia, but other than that, there's not a lot of women in them.
Yeah, there were hundreds of narrative films made in Germany after the Nazi takeover, and yeah, who knows what they're like. I don't really want to watch them to find out.
No, God, no. Although this was...
It might be interesting to read a book on the subject.
I mean, this was great, but I actually think this was probably unusual. But maybe there were a few unusual ones. I mean, I don't want to see the ones that are just about how Jews are evil vermin, because there were quite a few like that.
There were, but I think those were not as common as you'd think. Often they just wouldn't mention that. It would just be understood that, yes, we're striving for the pure Aryan race, and we just don't want to talk about any of the other horrifying exterminations we're planning.
Yeah, this way of doing things is, much more attractive kind of propaganda.
So much is unspoken, right? It's implied, or it's a further elaboration upon the logic that the film has, but it doesn't have to be stated.
So then we get our cut to Setsuko.
A Disney princess.
She is a Disney princess. When was Snow White made? 1937. Coincidence? Probably, but what a coincidence, because it does seem like they are basing this on her little communing with the woodsy animals, this sequence. paradise.
Yeah, so she lives in a paradise. Her family is very rich. We see later that her days have consisted of a lot of hard training for domestic life. At this point, I guess she's mastered...
Domestic life?
Whatever you want to call it, married life. At this point, I guess she's mastered most of those skills, and now she's free to just roam about the property and commune with the animals, and it is very endearing to see.
She chitters and chatters to them and tells them all her sweet little secrets.
The biggest one is that she's informed in the middle of feeding these fawns, he's coming home. Her brother and fiancé is coming home. She goes back and tells each different animal this news.
Yep.
And she's so excited.
We know trouble is coming for her.
Well, yeah, because he's already said on the ship that this is not good for him. He doesn't want to marry some pampered little doll.
He states explicitly at one point that he doesn't have sexual feelings for her.
Right. Which
makes sense. Like, why would you? She's not supposed to have sexual feelings at all, so this is not a problem for her. You know, for him it's a problem.
She does have sexual feelings. That's the volcano.
That's true, but she's not officially supposed to have sexual feelings.
Maybe, but no, she really does. It's a very interesting love triangle here of sorts, because everybody's very likable, I think.
Well, he's not.
I
really.
find him likable.
Not really, no. I don't think he's likable.
That probably puts a damper on
Definitely a
things.
hindrance.
His attitude makes sense. Why would he want to marry this young girl who was not anywhere close to an adult when he left and is supposed to be his sister? I mean, they're not really brother and sister. They probably never lived in the same house together. He's just been adopted formally, but still, she's a child.
We see when her father brings her to meet this guy at a hotel. Where are they anyway?
Tokyo.
They are in Tokyo?
When they meet him, yeah.
Yeah, they go to Tokyo because they live on their landed estate. You know?
Yeah.
Then we see this whole train sequence, and this was fascinating because she had, like you say, she has this dream that is a flashback to the montage of her learning all her strange samurai domestic duties, which involve everything from swordplay to sewing to studying languages. Like, there's a lot of stuff involved here, right?
Yeah.
And
the best one, I thought, was not just mastering the swordplay, but also mastering the kind of grim affect that a swords person is supposed to have, right? Because her teacher is not happy with her when she laughs, when she parries his blow. She has to have a very solemn look on her face when she parries the blow.
Yeah, and then she finally masters it and he smiles at her.
Yes.
But then she wakes up in the middle of this feeling anxiety that she hasn't studied hard enough to...
On the piano, especially.
To be worthy of this man, because her whole life has been devoted to marriage as its end, obviously. It kind of actually reminded me of Joan Fontaine in Letter from an Unknown Woman.
Yeah, a little bit.
Putting herself through the paces of whatever she considers making herself worthy of this fantasy.
Slacking off, feeding the fawns too much.
And so we know that discipline, the authoritarian regimes really like people to have discipline and to apply themselves, but at the same time that can create a complex.
Yeah, it can. We find out about this guy, he's an interesting mix. He wants to be free to choose the mate that he believes will complement him in the days to come, but he's also very dedicated to the idea of contributing to Japan, and he's been studying agricultural science in Germany primarily. He's gung-ho to get out there in Manchuria and tame the land and turn it into a productive...
The film's big aporia is that, on the one hand, it's all a metaphor about having good Japanese-German relationships, but at the same time, it's dedicated to fascist ideology, which is that your own nation and race, which is tied to the land and the soil, and your ancestry and your traditions, and your mystic connection to all of these things, is primary. So how can you have both? Well, this is what this movie is trying to do.
Yeah, well, they did.
You can fuck Germany, but you can't marry it, is the conclusion.
You can be friends on either side of the globe as well, right? On either side of the evil Soviet Union, a gigantic buffer between you, so you can attack it on either side. Their interests were not going to conflict, so they were able to actually sign this alliance. It does seem crazy, obviously.
And of course, despite the fact that you have this mystical tie apply to your own nation, and the land and the soil is part of that. So we see this close-up when he finally goes to visit his father, who's working in the fields, and he embraces his father's muddy, wet peasant hand, and this is like a terribly important moment, this grasping. Later he washes his face in the mud, ecstatically, and yet at the same time you're supposed to be able to transfer that to somebody else's land.
Well, yes, because you must expand or die.
So it's another
polity.
It's another internal contradiction in the rhetoric. When you're trying to apply such a uniform, total, absolute rhetoric, it shows all of these cracks just all over the place because you can't do that, right? You can't apply a theory that doesn't have any contradictions within it. It's not possible.
They don't seem to be troubled by that part of it.
Not the least.
No. Japan has prospered. It's been good to its people, but now we've got too many of us on these islands and we need Manchuria. It's gigantic.
There's also a strain within the rhetoric. We first get a taste of this on the boat where he's talking about what Japan has learned from the West, which is to industrialize, and we get a whole montage sequence of machines, the futuristic glorification of the machines, right?
And
that's what takes us to his sister working in the factory, I think.
Yeah, and it is quite something how quickly Japan turned itself into a modern country.
Quite something.
1867, in the 1860s anyway, Commodore Perry shows up in Tokyo and at battleship gunpoint says, "You are going to open Japan up to trade with the world." And they do, and they realize we have no choice. If we're going to remain independent, we have to catch up with what the West is doing in terms of machinery and industrialism, and they do. And we see all of this going on in the 30s when the German goddess sees Tokyo and says, "It looks just like Berlin. What's going on here?" And he's like, "We have two faces."
So as in the American Western, there's this idea that those who are bringing industrial progress and are going to develop the land are entitled to it.
Exactly, and that's why I think this is no more problematic than a Western, and that means they're both fucking problematic.
Of course, but right? I don't like watching Westerns usually either, although there are some great ones out there.
Because it's exactly the same, as you say. Whoever can use the land best deserves it, and that is the morality.
When we did our Jimmy Stewart episode, we didn't mention the several occasions in the Mon Westerns where his character does represent that, the man who will develop the land. That is why the woman chooses him, because he is...
No, not really.
Because he will settle down and make things grow, as he talks about.
In some of them.
That's in Bend of the River.
Yeah, but not in most of them, because most of the time he's a cattle guy. Those guys are forces of anarchy. They're not doing anything.
All right, I guess it's only in Bend of the River.
Right.
Where they're making a settlement and bringing civilization and going to cultivate the land.
Yeah, because look at most Westerns that you see, the cattle people are always evil. Like Liberty Valance is an emissary of the cattle people. You could go on down the list. Duel in the Sun. Lionel Barrymore is the cattle
so what do you
libertarian.
Because we didn't talk about this, so what do you think it means then in The Naked Spur that he's a cattle man? Or is that not in The Naked Spur? Yeah, he wants to ranch. He wants to have a ranch.
Ranchers are not forces of civilization in Westerns generally. I mean, you could say that they are if you want to, but that's not typical in the lexicon. It's the people that want to grow crops that are the forces of civilization.
Right. So who knows what it means?
Who knows what it means? But we know that whatever this movie is saying is really bad for the people of Manchuria. Because they are going to be forced into gang slave labor to help the Japanese overlords give them a great leap forward in agricultural productivity in the late 1930s here.
Sure, just like all forms of settler colonialism. Or rather, settler colonialism is where they just clear you off the land and maybe put you on reserves, and gang pressing, that's another kind of colonialism where they send overseers. But anyway, I'm not an expert. Not exactly sure what they're doing at the end here. They themselves have transferred their adoration of the soil from Japan to Manchuria, but they're using a tractor, so they're bringing progress, and then there's this evil fascist soldier standing guard in the middle of the field. What the hell's going on there?
Yeah, well, things were really tense in Manchukuo. So it was kind of a hybrid. They were definitely pressing the local inhabitants into servitude there, but they were also settling a lot of Japanese, both soldiers and workers there, because they were planning to keep it in perpetuity and have it become part of, well, it was considered to be part of the co-prosperity sphere.
The what now?
That's what they called the Japanese Empire, the co-prosperity sphere.
Lord.
But actually, Manchukuo was sort of, as far as I know, it was kind of halfway between a puppet state and a new province of Japan. I don't think that they ever quite settled on what it was going to be going forward, and obviously it was all taken back eventually.
Now we can zero in on the Setsuko part.
So Disney princess at the beginning, but a very steely, determined Disney princess in a very quiet way, right?
Well, Disney princesses can do that, particularly the chief's daughter in Peter Pan.
Sure.
Princess Tiger Lily.
Oh boy.
She was one of my, as an ignorant white child who knew nothing, she was one of my heroes, because she was one of the few Disney princesses. I always liked Disney princesses, but generally I did not consider them heroes. But the stoic Princess Tiger Lily, who is unflappable, and even when she's being drowned by Captain Hook, how could I forget what Captain Hook is called? She was one of my heroes.
Yeah, so the other characters in this film liken her to the volcano, which is an ever-present fact of the film. It's rumbling in the distance.
Looming over the estate the entire time, looming over the whole landscape.
Well, yeah, there are a lot of volcanoes.
Right.
She will either burst forth into violence herself or embrace the violence and marry the volcano and dive into it.
Yeah, she'll immolate. So
Yeah.
we kind of have an idea of probably which direction this is going to go in.
Unfortunately, yes, it is telegraphed. But that's fine for a melodrama. I mean, it sets you up. You're blaming this guy all through before anything happens, that he's going to drive this girl to kill herself.
And everyone keeps talking about how they can't understand why he doesn't. She keeps overhearing everybody saying she's unwanted, or hearing him saying she's unwanted, or, how could they reject such a perfect wife? And
Yeah, from the first moment, he doesn't recognize her. She is standing at the bottom of the hotel stairs in Western garb, and he's talking very openly with his German friend about how he doesn't want her. She's just my sister, that's it. And then later he realizes, or I guess he never even shows recognition, that she must have overheard.
Well, he's back with his parents, rediscovering his orgasmic joy in the land. His Western friend, university friend, is hanging out at the estate for some reason. I thought she was going to maybe end up with the father. What were you thinking? Why is she there?
Because she's his friend. She's in Japan as a journalist, so it makes sense. She's got to stay somewhere, and she's probably taking photographs on the estate.
Well, for the purposes of the plot, it's to torture Setsuko Hara.
But also to forge some kind of understanding between them. The women do not dislike each other. They get along very well. It's just that, yeah, for Setsuko Hara, she means the end of all of these dreams of marriage.
There is that hilarious scene with the chopsticks.
Yeah.
Which I took as being Disney princess's little joke, little sadistic joke on Aryan Goddess.
I suppose, yeah. I mean, it's something. It shows that a Nazi can have a sense of humor about herself. I don't know, there was just something about the cutting and the dialogue and the sound that just made that scene very charming and funny. The interplay between them. Yeah, it was. And the father is looking on the whole time. He's like, why didn't you give Gerda a fork and knife?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's also very hard to believe within the context of the film that she's actually never taken a meal with them before, but time is very gooey and difficult to understand over what time period all of these things are happening.
We're dealing with the mythic here. But in general, there is great accord between all parties, and Gerda never for a moment intends to interfere with this marriage.
But she is, just by the fact that
just by existing.
He wants to marry her.
Yeah, she knows that she has to bow out eventually.
Gerda Storm. There's a lot of explicit talk about storms and how Japan has weathered many storms in the past and will weather many more.
The storms have always come from the west, and now they're coming from the east.
A lot of west-east talk that I went right over my head. I didn't always know what it was referring to. When it was referring to Germany, I got that part, but Setsuko Hara, oh right, of course, Misuko is her name. The guy?
Teru.
Teru. Right. Yeah, and so it all has this apocalyptic volcano climax.
Pretty incredible. So the idyll back with his family is interrupted because at that point he's still dead set against marrying Setsuko Hara. He really believes this doesn't make sense. She's not going to be someone that I can bring with me on this imperialist mission to Manchuria. I want a tough girl like Gerda. Because this is not going to be easy. This is not going to be the pampered life. There's not going to be any enchanted animal interludes. So he still feels like this is the right thing. But he did need to unlearn some of his disdain for his parents and the way they live. And now that's been fixed. But then he gets this summons to go back to the samurai's estate because
there's a council meeting of all of the important families, it seems like.
Because he has to be disadopted because of this impasse they've reached. And the samurai himself, he's a very sympathetic character as well. He really cares about his daughter. He is very upset. He doesn't really want this adopted son to marry his daughter under these terms after the things he's said about her. It would just make her unhappy anyway, he believes.
But again, her whole life, Mitsuko's whole life up to this point has been devoted to earning through her preparation, turning herself into the ideal wife for this one man.
Yeah.
And so her entire identity has been rejected.
I think the flashbacks are very effective in conveying that. Not only the determination with which she embarks upon her training, but also just the very heartfelt goodbye sequence where she just looks so adoringly at his ship as it pulls out of the harbor. Whatever you think of this guy, you're convinced...
He's not worth it!
You're convinced that she feels that this is of cosmic significance. And it's not... Her father is not going to be upset with her. He'll find someone else to adopt and marry her. But that's not good enough for her. She feels like it's the end. And she has a very affecting talk about how she may wear her wedding gown only once in her life, and it may be tomorrow. And we understand that this means she's going to marry the volcano.
This is a trope that also exists in the West, this type of character. And, I'm going to have to refer to Henry James again. It is a cruder pop version of the much more refined version of the same kind of character that she's going to play in the Ozu movies, which is the absolutely passive to the point of masochistic, virtuous, traditional girl who nevertheless has a will of steel, right? She's like Millie Teal, except if Millie Teal had been represented by a volcano instead of the wings of a dove.
Now we're all set up for a real adventure climax here. The discussion, while it's going on, they realize that Mitsuko's not there.
And then he's had warnings from Gerda about the symbolism of the volcano. The volcano is frightening and it's coming nearer or something.
Yeah. So he goes up to Setsuko Hara's room. She's not there. He is informed that the wedding kimono is gone.
And he just sees the volcano at the window and he knows what's happened.
Yes. So he rushes off after her. And this is a really hard-earned apology that he delivers to her. It has to be, I think, because of all of the terrible things he said. Well, not terrible, right? But just terribly hurtful to her because of the way she conceived her mission.
Well, the movie doesn't really have a social critique of their relationship. I wouldn't really say it's doing any kind of interesting analysis of the gender problem.
Oh, no, of course not.
But it definitely thinks that he has to be, in melodrama terms, he has to be punished in order to re-earn the love of this perfect girl that he scorned.
Yeah, because she wouldn't want to be taken back out of pity anyway. She'd rather go into the volcano.
So
he's willing to almost kill himself to get to her, then that shows that this is he's reached a new level of enlightenment about the meaning of their marriage.
He maims himself. I mean, not permanently, but he walks on volcanic ash in his sock feet.
He has to, because it's the only way to get up there before she does, or anywhere close to the time that she's making. She's climbing up the side of the volcano where you don't have to burn your feet off. The side he's going up, there are steam vents all through it, and he's just getting hurt over and over and over again.
It really impresses the suffering on you. It really makes you flinch.
All these clouds of steam that are getting expelled out through. He's swimming across this lake first, and he's also getting scalded by that. And he just keeps stopping and being like, oh, I gotta keep going.
So the part that I thought was potentially subversive was how extraordinarily apocalyptic this whole sequence is, with some very fake-looking village miniatures getting destroyed by the angry volcanoes causing an earthquake. So considering how explicitly this is a propaganda movie about the direction that Germany and Japan are going in politically, this whole apocalyptic volcano sequence did seem like it wasn't projecting a very happy future. And what did you think about the solid tower of volcanic smoke that looks exactly like a mushroom cloud that is featured over and over?
Well, it's interesting, but nobody could have known what a mushroom cloud looks like.
I know, but still, it's chilling.
It is, yeah.
In retrospect.
All of this zeal is going to hurt a lot of people around the world, and it's also going to bring horrible things down on Japan as well. So, very misguided.
So you'd almost have to read it that way politically if it ended there, but of course it doesn't.
No, it's very interesting. So he's recovering. That's the next scene. His feet are bandaged.
That was really fascinating because there's the whole endless sequence of him trying to intercept her before she throws herself into the volcano. Then at the end, it merges with flashback. It merges into a flashback of him lying around recovering, thinking about it.
Yeah.
Right? And at first I was like, my God, are they going to say this was all a dream?
No, it's real.
No, it happened. It really happened.
And it's very interesting, they are going to be united as per tradition, this arrangement that was made for him to move up in class and for the two families to prosper together. But they do have a kind of secret between them. They can converse together in German and nobody around can understand what they're saying. So they're not totally merged with the body politic. They do have a kind of communion of two between them here.
And maybe she can even pretend to be Gerda in bed.
Maybe, I don't know. They do seem like they will please each other. It's very interesting because, again, if you divorce it from all of the horrible political implications, it does seem like a really satisfying ending to a melodrama here, that he has realized that not only does he have a duty toward this person, but on top of it, she's Setsuko Hara and she's really awesome. And she will be fun for him to be married to.
It is true, but at the same time, the size of that climax, given what surrounds it. I mean, if you divorce it from its political context, it is absolutely absurd as a melodrama. It's ridiculous. I can't accept it. But if you put it back in its political, you can't. Basically, you need the melodrama and the politics to be there together.
So they get married. We don't actually see the ceremony.
I mean, I can take a lot within the context of a melodrama, but not throwing yourself into a volcano.
I don't know. For me, that was fine.
yeah, whatever. Yeah, just, one more interesting climax.
The actual end of the film.
It's several steps beyond Duel in the Sun.
The actual end of the film is...
Selznick wishes he made this movie. Why didn't Jennifer Jones ever try to throw herself in a volcano? But Setsuko Hara did.
Well, she didn't actually, though. But she contemplated it and was ready to get into her wedding kimono and do it. But it didn't actually happen, thankfully. Now they're off in Manchuria. That's the end of the film. They've had a child and they are dutifully whipping everyone into shape over there, and there are brutal guards.
Grinning sadistically.
Yeah, staring into the camera. That's the last image. Is we're coming for you. We're going to make your arable land productive and kill you if you get in our way. And that's just the fascist grow or die ethos.
Sure, that's the same as the capitalist ethos.
Well, fascism is hyper-capitalism. There's no doubt about that. But we'll talk more about that in the Kurosawa film because that is explicitly stated.
There's a lot of repeated imagery.
There is. It's obviously in dialogue with this film.
You think?
Either this film or many other films that were similar to it, because...
Well, I'm sure there were a lot of propaganda films talking about tilling the land in Manchuria.
I have to assume that Kurosawa saw this movie and it has Setsuko Hara in it. Why wouldn't it be a reply to it in a way? I would be very surprised if we heard that Kurosawa never saw this film. Although Wikipedia says that it was poorly received in Japan.
So she was just a hit in Germany, but was she not a hit in Japan?
She was a hit in Japan because she was such an international celebrity celebrity all of a sudden. But I guess the films that people liked her in were maybe other propaganda films that were directed only by Japanese directors, because it said it was poorly received because of its condescending portrait of Japan.
Oh yeah, that's true. I mean, there are a lot of, we didn't even mention all the sequences that are just showing quaint Japanese customs, like a semi-documentary.
Yeah, it's not the kind of thing, if it was a purely Japanese-made film, they would not think to make something like this. Although, now that I say that, I think about a propaganda film like The Demi-Paradise, which is actually, I really enjoy that movie.
What is that?
It's a British film, just entirely about how quaint and wonderful Britain is.
Oh, the British have been selling that since the day they were born.
And that movie stars Laurence Olivier as a Russian Stahovite. He's an engineer who's come to England to help with building a new propeller that will help to fight the Nazis. And he has a romance with Penelope Dudley Ward, and they just lounge about her small town, and he learns about how wonderful the British townspeople are.
I mean, there's a lot of Powell and Pressburger that's doing that.
Yeah, they have so much in common with the Russian workers.
All right, we better move on to our next film.
So that's our assessment of our first explicitly fascist melodrama, and probably the most interesting thing to come out of it is how starkly it puts into perspective the exact same modalities that are evident in Westerns and a lot of other Hollywood films.
We just did Red Dust, which we both absolutely loved, and it's basically a fascist film.
Absolutely.
You said John Lee Mahan was basically a fascist.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this is a pro-colonialist film, Red Dust.
Even more so, though, Westerns. Like The Man from Laramie. He's the Man from Laramie. What are they doing? They're out there killing people so that the land can be cleared. That's all the Federal Army did. The Man from Laramie
wasn't as good as this movie. The Naked Spur, of course, which was accidentally or not, somehow definitely a more leftist than usual Western, and The Far Country. I preferred those. But.
Yeah, those films weren't really about land grabs either. And there can be great Westerns that are about land grabs, but I just want to say, they're not any less morally reprehensible than this fascist film we just watched. It's all something that needs to be remarked upon.
Now, this next film that we're going to watch, though, is not fascist. It is anti-fascist.
This is Antifa 1946. Pièce de résistance, Antifa. Now, one caveat, it was made under the auspices of American domination. So
of course it was, but yeah, and that is definitely worth noting. I kind of doubt that. Well, the problem being, who knows how anyone felt about anything ever. Like, we were just saying about the propaganda film, we don't know to what degree the directors agreed with anything they were being made to say, right? So it could be that people who are making these revisionist wartime films in the post-war era under the auspices of American domination, 100% agreed with what they were being forced to say, but we don't know what degrees of anything existed in individual cases.
No, we don't. And obviously, the golden age of Japanese cinema occurs in the 50s, and still during that period, at least during the very start of that period, every film had to be approved by American censors before it can be released. And still, incredible movies were made.
Now,
this movie is made the first year after the war, so it was obviously very carefully scrutinized by American censors who said, no, this is fine. And I think the way it ends does seem a little bit more cut and dried and hopeful than you would have thought it might if you followed through from the politics that are evident in the early part of the film.
And also the fact that the heroine does not, who knows if this is Kurosawa or American censors or who it is, but the fact that she doesn't really choose political involvement at any point.
No, and she doesn't choose a political theory. She never declares herself to be a Marxist. Now,
nobody
does.
is declared to be a Marxist in this movie.
Yeah, but he basically is a Marxist for sure.
Yes, but the man that he was based on was a communist spy. He was giving information to Soviet agent.
Right.
So, and that is not made clear in this film, although you can pretty much infer it.
Yeah, because he did join the Communist Party and went to jail for it, so he presumably had maintained those connections. But yeah, they don't say it explicitly.
So the story that this was based on was that of Hatsumi Ozaki, an informant of Richard Sorg, or however you would pronounce the name, but this was a German fellow who was a Soviet military intelligence officer. According to Wikipedia, although sources needed or citation needed is sprinkled all over this entry, but according to Wikipedia, the information he gave Sorg was in fact instrumental in affecting the outcome of World War II, which is also not made clear in this movie.
No, well, because they've changed it all around for this movie, and this here you could see that either they were forced to or they knew that they had to play up to the American censors this way. The information he's trying to get out to the world is about Pearl Harbor.
Ah, okay. I didn't even pick up on that.
Right, because, December 8th, right?
Oh, okay. No,
when
I don't know.
When she's being grilled, they say...
I do not know my world history dates well enough for that.
Okay. Well, when she gets hauled in by the police and they say, you were married to him, he was working against our government, but now it doesn't matter. You want to hear some news? They put on the radio, and it's December 8th, 1941, and everyone's excited.
So he's trying to prevent Pearl Harbor.
Yes.
So his activities in this movie are more just generically anti-militarist.
Yeah.
Than specifically pro-communist.
Right.
Yeah.
But it is fairly explicit at the beginning that he is a Marxist and he understands that fascism's roots are in this horrifying bargain between militarists and industrialists.
Yes, the fellow that he is based on was basically opposed to all sorts of wartime actions of the Japanese government on the basis of their oppression of the Chinese.
Yeah, well, that's a good basis.
Yeah. But that does seep into the movie through the way it begins.
Oh, yeah.
With the reference to Manchuria.
Yes. So we start, it's the early 30s, and we meet up with a group. It's a group of young men who are college students, and one girl, Setsuko Hara. She is the daughter of their favorite professor, who is a distinguished liberal, and she's clearly got some kind of a love triangle going on. It's evident very early.
Through their actions and their dynamics, yes. She's a very strange character.
She is.
She's almost, at the beginning here, she's almost playing a almost kind of Bette Davis character.
I don't know. She's an aesthete in terms of her political orientation.
No, but
she's oriented towards aesthetics and not...
Well, okay, that's not even what I was talking about, but I was talking about her dynamic with the men.
Yeah, sure.
She's cruel.
Well,
But she's defensively cruel, and she's also, as you say, she's an aesthete, but that's also defensive. It's all defensive.
Yeah.
And they have this whole history between them that the film alludes to constantly, but it's all in the past even at the beginning of the film.
Yeah,
and so the dynamic between them is like already very long established and referring to things that we have never seen.
Yeah, and it is crystallized in one scene where she is going across this brook on some rocks, and the distance between the last rock and the shore is a little bit too far for her to make it with a simple step, and she's hesitating on the rock, and she looks across, and the two guys are there. They're both thinking about what to do, and one of them just sort of looks at her longingly, and the other one just makes a decision and goes over and grabs her, and she looks really annoyed that he has done this.
Yeah, so it's hard to figure out who she likes at the beginning, because then she starts flirting with the other guy.
Because this guy, and you could look at this in a lot of ways. You don't have to take the film's perspective on it, or even her perspective. I think a modern person watching this, when I saw it the first time, I was like, okay, this guy is a mansplainer, he's gross. The other guy is a sensitive, nice guy.
I think we are supposed to feel that way in the first couple of scenes.
Yeah.
For sure. And then it turns it around. Even for the time, that's how we're supposed to feel. That there's this one guy who's hyper obsessed with politics, and that's all, he's a Bernie bro. He can't think about anything else. He can't talk about anything else. He's boring her to tears.
He berates her for having no social conscience.
He's always criticizing her, right? He's like just abusive.
And he grabs her and carries her across. It's demeaning.
Mm-hmm.
She just was looking maybe for a hand to help her across, and he just...
And it's weird, like, even the way they're physically presented at the beginning of the movie, the one guy with the glasses, well, let's get their names. Well, they keep calling him Nogi, which is easier for me to pronounce.
Yeah, let's call him...
I won't fuck it up.
Noge is his last name, yeah.
So, Noge, he's the guy with the glasses, and then, who's the other one? Itokawa. Later has a mustache, but at the beginning of the film, it even looks like Itokawa is cuter.
Yeah, although he's kind of spineless looking right from the start, but that's sort of sweet. I'm kind of spineless looking too, so...
I know, it can be attractive.
Yeah, easier relationship with him because it's all on her own terms, right? When Noge puts her down, she walks away from him in a huff and plays around with Itokawa's hat, and then he chases her off.
This whole scene at the beginning, speaking of Snow White and the Seven Dwarves, all of these men who we don't know at first who the hell they are, but they turn out to all be the favorite students of her law professor father.
Yeah, they're a liberal/leftist study group.
And they're all literally following her around and chasing her. She's like the queen bee. She actually is the queen bee of this group, not like in Anatahan.
And they sing songs. It's all a wonderful picnic. It's this great day. But then there's a terrible coda to it. After they all have soaked in the sun and enjoyed all of the great things that nature has to offer, they start hearing machine gun shots, and she tries to aestheticize that too, right? She says, oh, it has such a wonderful rhythmic sound to it. And you're thinking, well, I guess it is a bit terrifying no matter what it is, but maybe it's just people training at least, not actual live machine gun fire at people. But you're disabused of that eventually when she walks just over a hill and they find someone who has been shot and is dead on the ground.
So what is this supposed to be? Because the film never
it's a student protest that got interrupted by soldiers killing some of them.
Okay.
Fascist crackdown is already on. So they've been enjoying their idyll on the hill or the mountain, but already the fascist crackdown has begun at the university. Her father has been forced to resign. Students have been protesting in favor of free speech, and some of them are getting killed.
Now, this movie is an interesting window into an alternate universe in which Kurosawa made movies about women.
This is the only movie, as far as I know, I haven't seen all of Kurosawa's movies, but this has been mentioned by other people. This is the only movie that you can really say is from the perspective of, or has a female protagonist.
And it's such a odd movie, like it's such an odd choice to tell this story in this way. And he's great at it.
Yeah.
He's the only one of the internationally famous post-war Japanese auteurs who doesn't primarily tell stories about women.
Yeah, that's how he distinguishes himself.
I guess so, but I kind of wish he did. You and I, when we did our, trying to get more familiar with Japanese directors, we found that we really liked all of the modern Kurosawas, but weren't so interested in anything with a period setting, which is not like Mizoguchi. The Mizoguchis can often be very good when they have period settings.
Sancho the Bailiff.
Yeah, and, most of them have period settings.
Yeah.
Actually, I don't think we've seen a modern setting Mizoguchi.
Yeah, it's not that we don't like Japanese period dramas. We generally have liked the ones we've seen, but the Kurosawas, I've liked them much less than the ones that take place in the 40s or 50s or whenever he happens to be making them. Yeah, it's true. But we'll see how we feel about that when he actually did The Idiot, and we're going to be watching that because Setsuko Hara is in that one.
Okay.
I haven't seen it, so.
So there is this very complex relationship interplay between these three characters, and like I said, from the beginning she is on the defensive and she is trying to kind of cling to this life that she thought she was going to have as a pampered, bourgeois, pretty young woman.
And what you were talking about before, right, her cruelty, when she has a fight with Noge and he stomps off and she is clearly lost, he has chastised her for being thoughtless and heedless of the coming fascist danger. She's left with Itokawa. She tells him to get on his knees and apologize to her for whatever comes to mind. She just wants to have that tableau enacted where he stands in for Noge and apologizes for insulting her.
But then as soon as
he does it, he starts trying to do it, and she's like, "You spineless weasel, get out of here."
Yeah, so this is the whole thing where I'm being like, she's almost like a Bette Davis character here at the beginning. But it's because, and later we get confirmation of this from apparently the way they interacted, the three of them that we don't see before this, but it's because she is worried about the coming fascist threat.
Oh yeah,
and she's just like acting out.
Yeah, she is.
And we find out none of this is made explicit, but it is made explicit.
Yeah.
It's made implicit that it's because as a woman, or this particular kind of woman of this class, she has nothing that she can do about it, unlike these men. She's forced to serve them tea while they have their university meetings.
Yeah, but she's very educated, very thoughtful. She is not someone who hasn't considered these things. She is, as you say, she is trying to preserve some kind of space free from politics for as long as she is able to do it, because...
And in part that's because of her own personality, because later when she's having a talk with Itokawa about who she should marry, she basically says that if I give in to Nogi's way of looking at things, it will consume my whole life.
Yeah, and if I marry you, well, we have a pleasant, boring time.
Yeah, that's what she says.
Yeah, she doesn't spare his feelings at all.
She's just a real jerk, kind of like the hero in the last movie.
So, but, Itokawa, he really deserves it. This guy is an incredible weasel throughout this movie.
But initially we are given a sympathetic excuse for why he can't become a radical.
Yeah, no, I understand it, but he is spineless anyway.
Well, the movie which is that he needs to help his mother who's a widow.
He's not an inhuman caricature of a weasel, he's just a very human weasel.
Well, the movie seems to ultimately take the position that anyone who chose bourgeois comfort, which would include most film directors during this period, was a weasel. Was a bourgeois fucking weasel.
Yeah.
So you might as well just do some penance for that.
Yeah.
A boring, mustachioed jackass.
Who got married during the intervening years where he's off screen because it pleased his mother.
He's a mama's boy?
Yeah. And yeah, he's become a prosecutor, which is one of the worst things you can be on the best of days. And in a fascist state, it's really bad. Now, he's a prosecutor he has no convictions. I mean, that's the only thing you can say about him. He doesn't this has some passing similarities to The Mortal Storm, which we talked about.
Yeah, I was thinking about that.
He's not like Robert Young, who's a true believer in that film, who also has feelings for Margaret Sullivan. This guy is not a true believer in anything. He has so little belief that he's willing to apologize for things he hasn't done if it will please others. He'll just do anything to get along, which is good and bad. He does try where he can to help his friend Noge without going outside of the boundaries of propriety. So he does get him out of jail a little early, and he drops little hints here and there that Noge's about to get in big trouble, but obviously it's not really enough to save him from his fate.
Ultimately, so Nogi's arrested the first time.
Yeah, and he's carted off to jail, and 5 years pass, 5 years. He's not in jail for the full 5 years. He says he got out a year earlier, but he comes to visit the family again. And
but in this intervening time, we see Setsuko Hara having a lot of ennui as she studies the things that a woman of her class can study, which is typing and flower arranging.
Yeah.
And she's like a flower arranging fucking radical. Like, she just astounds the other women in her flower arranging class, which her mother is so happy that she's decided to study.
Yeah.
Because it means she's like devoting herself to something steady.
And womanly, right? Because they say when she was a little girl, she really worried us. All she would do is draw airplanes. So she is a gender radical from the beginning, and they're trying to force her into this pose of this
wifely
middle-class
accomplishment.
Woman. Yeah.
So that is actually one thing that she has in common with her character from the other movie.
Yeah, to some extent. Although the other character really believes that she has done a wonderful thing by mastering all of the...
Yes. No, Setsuko Hara in this movie...
She thinks flower arranging is fucking stupid.
Yes, but she does... Well, what do you think she's doing in that flower arranging scene? Do you think she is presenting her own artistic expression within the boundaries of what she's allowed to do, or do you think she's just commenting that this is fucking stupid? It's like Dadaist.
Both, I think. She does like playing piano,
she does.
Although she eventually realizes that that's not consistent with the new life that she's chosen for herself. But that does seem to be something she's very proud of.
Sure.
But that's not inherently feminine or masculine. I guess it does go along with some of the interesting things women have been allowed to do.
Playing the piano within your own home or teaching lessons within your own home is a feminine accomplishment.
Yeah, exactly. This scene is really what pushes her into a new phase of her life when Noge is brought back to visit after many years and talks about his prison experiences, how he read all of the history of philosophy. He's got everything straightened out now. He's renounced his Marxism or his leftism, and he's ready to go to work for the state. I don't think anyone feels all that convinced by it. And it really hurts her to hear him say these things, whether it's true or not. It's so dispiriting to
Yeah, her ideals are crushed.
Yeah.
The only one who does believe it is Itakawa.
Yeah, because for him, he's like, this is what a normal person does. They get sent to jail for many years. When they get a chance to get out, just by saying a few words about how they don't believe things anymore, that makes sense to me. Right? But no, that is not Noge's way. And I think we know it.
So this is where she decides to set out on her own because the thing she's been, waiting around for. Maybe she thought that he would come back and he'd be the same old way and she would marry him or whatever.
Maybe.
But anyway, the thing that she's been waiting for is for him to come back, and now that it has happened this way, she wants to start her life over, basically.
So she wants to go to Tokyo?
Interestingly, she has this whole discussion, given this subtle gender rebellion that she's having. She really talks things over with her father while her mother is forced to eavesdrop on the things that are really going on, sort of like she is with the politics.
And here we definitely get, even in The Samurai's Daughter, we had some scenes like this, but here even more, we have some in-depth father-daughter time, which is going to be a major trait of her Ozu films.
Yeah, she's really father-identified, Setsuko.
Yeah, so they hash it all out, and the father says, makes sense to me. If you've really thought this through and you're ready to assume responsibility for your adult life, go to Tokyo and I guess see what happens.
But realize that life is going to be, under a fascist regime, is going to be full of suffering and hardship and sacrifice.
Yeah. She goes off. We've got some ellipses here and we don't see her again for a few years when she bumps into Itokawa and they each give their resumes.
Well, we find out that she is not capable, because of the kind of personality we've seen, she's not capable of holding a steady, good job for a woman of her class.
She says she's been at 3 different offices. She works there for a while, and then presumably she loses her temper and gets fired, and then gets another job. She's obviously capable of doing it, but stomaching the office politics.
Well, we saw her falling asleep over the typewriter in her typewriting class.
She's managed to keep enough money coming in, but obviously none of this is fulfilling.
Well,
it's
I don't know.
terrible...
Maybe her parents are sending her money. Who knows?
She says she's working, but she's worked 3 different jobs. That's all. And she'll be fired again soon, no doubt, because she thinks her jobs are stupid, which is the correct attitude toward almost any job.
Well, okay, so what we find out, well, I'm jumping ahead now to when she runs into Nogi. Ultimately, what we find out is this whole time she has been wanting to find something actually meaningful to do with her life, but she thinks the only avenue she has to do that is to meet up with Nogi again. But she's not quite sure how to arrange this. Finds out from Itokawa that he's in the city.
Itokawa gives her his work address. Basically, he says he works for the minister.
Spends an entire year, 4 seasons, walking back and forth in front of the office front.
That scene, this is going back, we didn't mention it, but I really liked it, where Noge is visiting, and then it's time for him to leave, and the mother is like, aren't you coming out to say goodbye to him? And it has these time-lapse...
Oh yeah, time-lapse
montage.
Silent film poses.
Yeah, so we see her in every possible attitude, leaning against the door and like thinking about how to engage with this situation. It's quite something. It's a little...
The filmmaking is very inventive in a completely different way than the hyperactive Samurai's Daughter.
Now she knows where he is. She goes to see him. She doesn't actually go up though. She is announced and disappears, and Noge has a premonition that maybe the lady that's visiting him is Yuki, which is her name.
She is in a weird predicament, because even when finally he does run into her when she's walking by the window, and he invites her up to the office, and they're there by themselves, and they finally have their discussion, even then, she's not sure how to ask him, what she has to ask him, or even exactly what it is that she has to ask him. She's asking him to give meaning to her life, but also she's romantically interested in him. And she also doesn't yet know if he's going to share with her the fact that what she knows, which is that he's involved in leftist spying on the government.
Yeah, it's a very tricky situation. He could just stonewall her and think, well, maybe the government got to her and she's working for them to expose me. Who knows? I mean, their rapport is such that it doesn't seem likely that he would entertain that notion.
There is a moment when she finally brings it up, though, where there's it almost seems like there's 5 minutes of silence and stillness as they just stand there next to each other, not knowing what to do next.
Yeah, it's really good. That is all because, as you say, there's not really any kind of established way in which a woman can act politically in this culture at that time. Even act in a countercultural underground way. Like, to become part of the underground, someone has to tell you where the underground is, right? It's like the adventurous.
And I guess the universities, or some or most, are not co-ed, because that's what you would, or at least
it didn't seem like it.
Or at least this law class, but we saw the student protests too, and they were all men.
It seemed like it. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if I want to say that for sure, because I didn't look for it. She's obviously been educated, but maybe just by her dad at home. I don't know.
I think women would have been going to universities at that point.
They had to be,
if they were co-ed, because this is the early 30s. They were barely co-ed in the United States, like a major university.
But yeah, this reminded me of a movie that comes out in the mid-40s, The Adventurous, aka I See a Dark Stranger, with Deborah Kerr, where she's been nursing this anti-British hatred throughout her life, and she shows up at this museum where this old Irish Republican Army guy works as the curator, and she says, "Please, sir, I want to join the IRA." And she can't figure out how to do it, just blurts it out here. But how do you where's the secret handshake to get into these clubs?
But even at this point, she isn't initiated into the club.
No, she isn't.
She's just allowed to share his...
She becomes part of his life.
Share his trials.
Exactly.
Yeah. So she tries to serve him as a wife to make his life easier, and she has the burden of knowing what's going on, and basically now sharing the burden of knowing that he will probably be killed at any minute.
Anytime he leaves the apartment could be their last farewell, and that's actually what happens. He says he's coming back for dinner. He goes to meet someone to pass on some kind of message at a restaurant, and he's jumped by a bunch of government operatives, and she never sees him again.
Now, this is not made explicit, but there is no scene of them getting married.
No, they're not married.
No, but she does refer
in the eyes
to herself,
of the law.
She does refer to herself as his wife a lot at the end.
Yeah. Well, because they are married in the eyes of heaven.
But that really gross looking cop with the frog face, he refers to them as lovers.
You know who that is. Ikiru. Takashi Shimura.
Oh, but he's old in that movie.
Well, he's made up to look older than he's like a middle-aged guy in the 40s and 50s, but yeah.
And that is one of the things about Japanese films. They would make you up to play older.
Well, I think Shimura is in almost all of Kurosawa's films. Like, he's in Stray Dog, too. He's the sort of Danny Glover policeman, I'm getting too old for this shit kind of guy.
Well, yeah,
he's amazing. That actor is amazing. Yeah. His role in this one is very small, but he makes an impression as a disgusting fascist police investigator. Yeah. They're torturing her or slapping her around anyway to try to get some information out of her.
But she has never been told anything.
No, that's where they spring the Pearl Harbor announcement on her. Yeah. And then she's sent home. You get the impression that they probably would have just kept her in some dungeon forever, except that Itokawa and her father both have some kind of standing still, so they let her go. She's no longer a danger. The thing that her husband was working on has already happened anyway.
Her father makes a speech to Itokawa about how he's been a useless, forcibly retired professor for 10 years, and no, he's going to have to take a stand no matter how ineffectually and defend Nogi.
Yeah, that scene is great.
It is
that
great.
Dad scene. Yeah. And Itokawa's like, well, sorry, he's dead already. You can't defend him. You can't redeem yourself.
He died in his cell.
We know what that means.
We all know what that means.
Beaten to death.
Then we enter phase 3.
Yeah, so if it had ended there, this movie wouldn't have been a great movie. It would have been a really interesting movie. But this last phase is where it becomes really a feminist triumph. Because
it becomes like an everything triumph.
Yeah.
It becomes a humanist triumph.
Yeah, well, sure. The way it deals with gender, because the way it deals with gender up to this point is not that interesting, right? She's living politically through her husband.
We have been shown enough to know that that is because of these constraints on her.
Yeah, for sure, but she finds a way now.
Right.
And she does have
to live her life fully. That's really what she has been wanting to do, to find a way to do that.
Yeah, and he did...
And you know what? It means that she is still an aesthete, ultimately. Her goal in life is to try to find a way with these terrible social constraints on everybody, but her in particular as a woman, to try to find a way to live her life fully.
At the end, the very, very end, she tells her father and her mother that she's become a rural cultural icon.
And she's also called a great woman at one point by her mother-in-law.
Yeah, she is. And again, the husband, Noge, he does help her to come to that realization, but not even through anything that he tells her. It's really just about things she learns by watching his behavior. And she puts a totally new spin on it at the end. She does things he never would have dreamed of doing. He can't even face his parents. He hasn't seen them in 10 years, doesn't know what to say to them, doesn't know how to reconcile their broken relationship with his politics, which he states will help them as well, but he doesn't know how to bridge that gap.
No,
with them.
he tells her that my political actions are also
intended to help them.
They're part of my relationship with my parents, so I'm just letting the big blanket thing take care of that little thing.
Yeah.
But that's not how she sees it.
She undertakes this mission to go and show them their son was a remarkable person, a remarkable fellow, and she's an even more remarkable person, and she's gonna heal this gap between the bourgeoisie and the intellectuals and the downtrodden peasants in the hinterlands, and out of all of that will come
God knows what.
A new, socially revolutionized Japan, possibly.
Just naturally, but not through any specifically political actions.
No, she doesn't go down there spewing Marx or talking any kind of political theory.
She doesn't decide to, take any university courses.
No, she just says, look, here I am. I'm going to help you. We are going to learn what it means to be human together.
But the way this happens, so she gets down there and the whole community, including the parents, think that this son has been a spy and a traitor. So they've
been ostracized. They've boarded themselves up in their home because people are throwing rocks through their windows.
They only work cultivating the rice fields at night.
She says we're like owls.
Yeah. Father has stopped moving or speaking.
He's catatonic, basically. Yeah, he's not helping on the field or anything.
We've talked about catatonic shell dads before. Well, this is the literal embodiment of that. She has no idea what she's doing. She just gets to work in the rice field because that's what the mother's doing.
The first thing the mother does is dig a grave for the urn of her son's ashes, and she curses her son.
Terrible, ungrateful son.
Yeah. But she's also very devastated visibly anyway. So it's not like she's a melodrama mother who actually hates her son. She's just so hurt by what's happened that she has to express invective against him, but she's lovingly burying him anyway.
Well, he has caused them a lot of problems.
Sure.
It's not obvious to them why his political actions are good for them.
No, not at all. Setsuko Hara obviously has no idea how to break up ground or do any of the things associated with creating a successful rice paddy.
These Japanese peasants don't have the fancy farm equipment that we saw at the end of The Samurai's Daughter that they brought to Manchuria.
All that stuff is over across the sea.
So we just get these endless sequences of the work involved in these peasants, the terrible, backbreaking, just physically destroying yourself work involved in working. I guess this is not their own land, is it? Do they actually have these plots of land for themselves and then they sell the rice, or how does this work?
Well, I don't know. My guess is that it's more of a tenant farmer situation, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, well, I assume so. There's just this impoverished village, each of whom are cultivating a certain area of the land for landlords.
Yeah, so basically you get to keep a certain part of it, and then you have to turn over the surplus to the landlord who will sell it. That's my guess, but none of that is mentioned in the film.
There are some really extraordinary, there's just this whole long sequence of involving the viewer in this process, visually.
Yeah, and we are figured in the film as middle-class people who don't know anything about this.
There's just a lot of amazing, did you notice these particular cuts? They're like cut dissolves? I have no idea what you'd call it, but a fade of one image on top of the other after the cut is made. And it's just done so artfully and so beautifully, adding a dynamism to these scenes of her working in the field.
It's a totally different effect, but it's the same technique that was used where she's hesitating at the door of what to do.
These are quicker cuts, and the fade is over top of the next image.
And all of it's made harder. It's hard work under the best of circumstances, but it's the worst circumstances because the village is hurling insults.
Well, because one morning she just decides that she's not putting up with this shit anymore, and they're going to start doing this during the daytime again.
She's hauling, I guess maybe this is the rice plants to the paddy, because first you have to clear it all out, irrigate it, and it has to be basically like a marsh.
Yeah.
And then you put the plants in. Her back just can't handle it. She's not used to it enough. Presumably she gets better and better at this.
Well, because the mother looks so much frailer than she does, but obviously has become inured to this type of work.
Yeah, and she collapses, and it's amazing, this scene. She's trying to get up. It's sort of like that Amazing Spider-Man number 33, where he's trying to push this gigantic machine off of his back, and he finally does. But in this one, she doesn't, actually. She is saved by the mother who finally comes and takes it, and they haven't really been speaking before that.
Yeah, it's like this is the scene of her acceptance.
It's really incredible, that scene. Haruko Sugimura.
Oh, it is! Oh, she's in everything.
She's in all the Ozus, yeah.
I didn't even recognize her.
And she's got a great range that she can play.
She plays young, she plays old, she plays young when she's old and old when she's young. And
yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know, we don't want to go on describing all of this too much longer, but the emotional climax. Now, I was watching this movie and I have to say, this is a common experience for me watching movies in the past few years, maybe because I'm just watching so many of them and I'm watching them analytically because I'm writing and I'm podcasting. I often watch the movie and don't think that I'm being emotionally involved in it until the moment when the tears start pouring down my face.
Yeah.
And of course, where do you think the moment came in this film, Dave?
When the field was prepared. For me, it was when the mother takes the burden off her back.
Okay. No, for me, that was a great moment. But for me, it was when the father comes back to life.
Sure. Well, that's a great one too. Yeah.
After the other peasants destroy all the work they've done. Well, we have this moment where the two women have finished the enormous field all by themselves. And there's this moment of triumph before Setsuko Hara collapses with fever.
And she's like, look, we actually did it. I can't believe it. She's laughing.
Yeah, the mother's laughing. And then the next day she is crying because she finds out that the evil shits who are surrounding them have destroyed all their work. They've just seemingly tossed trash as well as written nasty signs for them.
Yeah, basically they graffitied their rice paddy with traitor and spy placards.
Actually, my tears started when she was collapsed in front of the father the mother was collapsed in front of the father going, what farmer would do that? What farmer would destroy a rice paddy?
That's how fascism poisons the minds.
So Setsuko Hara, despite having a fever, goes out there and, destroys the signs and starts replanting the rice plants.
And that's where the father is drawn in.
And he just starts bellowing about, you evil sinners.
Yes.
And they are evil sinners.
Presumably they do come around after that because...
Well, it looks like they're actually being joined by some sympathetic peasants at this point.
It's a long, drawn-out process of finally bringing them on side.
Well, they're sinners in what they've done. They're not necessarily sinners inherently in themselves.
They just turn themselves into a stupid mob, and you can unlearn that or pull out of that tailspin.
Their consent has been manufactured.
Yes, and it's really Setsuko Hara and her actions that heals this entire town, eventually.
Right, and I guess that is something.
That's pretty major political achievement.
Something in addition to, just improving the conditions of their lives.
It improves the condition of their minds and their orientation towards the world.
Yeah.
And that's where we leave it. She has her final conversation with her mother, who says, your father's been reinstated. Now, that scene is the only one that I feel like it was put there just to please American censors. The university's been reopened. Freedom of speech has been restored.
Again, there's that hyper-focus on this somehow being the whole issue, just like in Mortal Storm.
Right? So there's no more talk about the corrupt industrialists collaborating with the military. It's just, let us speak. Now, I really doubt that Marxists were allowed to speak freely in Japanese universities while the United States was occupying the country. Although I guess I don't want to go too far with that because I don't know. I have no expertise in Japanese history, but I would think after the Iron Curtain fell and the Cold War began in earnest, the United States would be very vigilant about allowing too much Marxist free speech on campuses in the late 40s and 50s in Japan as well. They didn't line them up and shoot them, but they probably had subtler ways of blacklisting and proscribing that kind of behavior.
So for me, the two moments that, despite the fact that in many ways this is an uncharacteristic role for Setsuko Hara, the two moments that really connected with my idea of her persona that I've formed so far were when Itokawa comes to visit her at the end and starts trying to lecture her about coming home and dropping this peasant act, and then just gives up and starts laughing and says, "Your sheer life force is so strong," or whatever he says, "that I have to admire you, even though I think what you're doing is ridiculous."
And he wants to go visit Nogi's grave, and she's like, "Nope, you're not doing that. Sorry, you don't deserve it."
Yep. So something about this sheer life force that people can only marvel at.
Yeah.
That she possesses.
It's true.
And then the moment when her mother, during that final coda discussion, says, "You were made for suffering," and she says, "I don't think of myself that way."
It was amazing.
No, this is for her. Her life has been completely fulfilled now. And she does not think of this as embracing suffering.
No, there's sadness for sure, right? And we do have that scene right before the end where she is down by the stream and she sees students singing the same old songs and tears come to her eye. But that's not regret. I mean, that's in the title. There are no regrets.
And they do say it several times.
That gets said several times. Yeah.
But also something about her persona is that so very often she does not end up with a man at the end of the movie.
And in this case, she's going back to the land, but she is not off by herself. She is with the people on the truck going back to the land, and she is a major part of this community. But it's true, she is not entangled in any kind of a romantic relationship.
She lives for other things.
There are other things in this world beyond romance.
Romance is good, though.
It is good.
But it can be constricting for women under patriarchy.
It sure can. So I guess that's it for Setsuko Hara this week. I can't wait to do this entire series.
No,
it's going to be
exciting.
Now it's time for Elise's Memos on the Memos.
Well, not just that. I actually went down quite a few Selznick Jones rabbit holes.
Oh, okay.
In the last few weeks. I guess I was just waiting for quarantine to give me enough time for my mind to start working on some of these questions that were raised while we were watching the Jennifer Jones movies. And the first, well, as I said before, I started reading the Memos book, Memo from David O. Selznick, that was published in the 70s.
A famous compilation.
And I read a good chunk of it.
It's not exhaustive, though, right? It's curated.
Oh, God, no. No, and yet it's enormous. I've read around in it in the past, in my 44 years.
Me too. I remember flipping through it at the Concordia University Library many times.
So this time around, I did not read anything about Gone with the Wind, because I have read... It's not even one of my favorite movies, and I have actually read probably more about its production than any other film. Because there's so much written on it.
Forget about that.
Right. And then the early years, there's not that much about it. Not that many memos in the book. So I concentrated on everything after Gone with the Wind. Keeping in mind that the editor of this book selected the memos, so there's no way of knowing without going to the Selznick archives, which are probably vast, how representative the chosen memos are.
And you said there's a foreword to it written by, or there are...
I didn't look into the publication history of this book.
But there are little prefatory pieces by Selznick himself, so he was aware of what was being selected, it seems.
Yeah, I don't know how that...
Even though he was dead by the time it was published.
Yeah, like by about 10 years, so I don't know how that worked. And I didn't look into the publication history of this, but there are prefaces to the different sections, which are about his various production companies and his various movies, right? What I took away from this, if it is in fact representative of Selznick, the producer, his personality was, and this is no surprise to Selznick fans, but how focused he is on the women that he represents and stories about women, but in a particular way, like, because that could sound very creepy.
Well, don't you think it was a little creepy?
No, I don't think it was very creepy. Obviously, it got a little creepy in the case of Jennifer Jones, but is love creepy? you decide. Love, business, it's difficult when you're in a business that involves presenting beautiful women all of the time. He had his own very particular tastes, and they were not mainstream, and he didn't think they were mainstream. And he was fascinated with telling stories about women. And all of this converged. The fact that he was interested in finding actresses that would bring fresh personalities to the screen, that were attractive in a way that he himself appreciated, that was not necessarily representative of what Hollywood... Like, he wasn't interested in conventional glamour. He was very conscious when he brought Ingrid Bergman, to Hollywood, that she was going to represent a new kind of look, and he wasn't going to allow her to have the glamour makeover.
Maybe, okay, but if you talk to any person on the street who's a glamorous Hollywood star of the 40s, a lot of them probably will say Ingrid Bergman.
Yes, but at the time that he brought her over, the idea was Marlene Dietrich or Rita Hayworth. And that is not... He thought that Bergman was going to be, just something brand new based on the Swedish films that he had seen her in, and particularly the Swedish intermezzo. Also, he is responsible for signing, as we noted... Did we note that recently? I think we did. Responsible for signing Katharine Hepburn to RKO, despite the fact that she asked, according to Elizabeth Kendall, she asked for an insane fee.
Yeah.
But he discovered her, and he signed her, and he gave her what she wanted. Ended up giving Jennifer Jones what she asked for, too, even though there's a memo saying that she had asked for an insane fee based on her lack of experience. He found and signed Dorothy McGuire. Very unusual looking actress.
Love her.
She's someone I would actually like to do.
Yeah, I want her to be in our Acteurist Oeuvre-view.
Well, the only problem with her career, it's basically manageable, but the problem is that it extends into the 60s, and she made a lot of Disney films, including...
The Swiss Family Robinson.
And...
I don't know.
What's the worst one you can possibly think of live-action 60s Disney film for us to cover? It's got a dog in it.
Oh, well, that's not a Disney film, is it? Old Yeller?
Yeah, I think Old Yeller is a Disney film.
Well, that's a great movie, though.
Do you love that movie? Okay, we're doing Dorothy McGuire, then.
I mean, it's upsetting.
It's very, very upsetting.
I haven't allowed myself to watch it since I was a kid.
I don't know if I can watch it again. Like, it's up there with White Dog for upsetting dog movies.
But yeah, Old Yeller's from the 50s.
Yeah, but her career does extend into the 60s.
Yeah, sure.
And she did a Haley Mills film. I love Haley Mills. I'd love to do a Haley Mills film. Dorothy McGuire, who he saw in Claudia, and he actually has a memo specifically referring...
It's kind of neat that the sequel to that movie is called Claudia and David.
Sure.
Oh, Selznick.
He has a memo to Eddie Goulding,
one of my favorites,
who asks for his opinion because of his signing McGuire and his discovering Claudia as a property. Asks for his opinion on the rushes, her tests. So not the rushes, his opinion on her screen tests for the role. Selznick goes on about how she is brought to the stage because she was wildly popular in this stage play. She brought to the stage, and now they're hoping that she can bring to the screen a very new and fresh and unique quality, a pixie quality, he calls it. And it is absolutely true. Now, for that very reason, I'll now bring Jennifer Jones into this. I also did some reading up on Jones. I bought a little book, the only book seemingly devoted to her films, which is just by some random fan named Paul Green, who has published numerous TV-related book titles and who has freelanced for various publishers, including Marvel and DC. Other things he's published include a book on Jeffrey Hunter, the film, television, radio, and stage performances, the Encyclopedia of Weird War Stories, the Encyclopedia of Weird Detectives. So he's just a pop culture guy who happens to love Jennifer Jones.
Who doesn't?
Now, as such, this book is really lacking. I was mainly wanting to read it for whatever production details it had, and I did really value it for that.
Oh, so it did have a lot of that.
Yeah, because otherwise I'd be combing through like 100 different biographies of stars and directors trying to get these details. So it did have a few of those, but even in that case, he seems to get tired while he's writing the book. So at the beginning, everything is really contextualized in terms of how the production came about, and toward the end, more and more of those details are missing. There's really not any analysis. There's just plot summary followed by opinion, and the opinions are not great. As such, I mean, there's a lot of movies that you and I like that she's made that he does not like. For example, he doesn't get Ruby Gentry. He doesn't particularly like Duel in the Sun, but a lot of people don't. He does like Gone to Earth, he does like Portrait of Jenny, so that's all good. But a lot of the ones that we enjoyed, he just isn't interested in at all, and toward the end of her career, that's most of them.
Okay, yeah.
So yeah, I was saying I found out some more things about Jennifer Jones' career by looking at that book. So speaking of Claudia, Selznick was much more involved in her career from beginning to end than you and I realized while we were doing the podcast. So we did mention at some point that he signed her and kind of found the Bernadette role for her. Well, what happened was he signed her because she was interested in playing Claudia. She heard that there were auditions to play this. She was obsessed with the play.
It's a good play.
And Kay Brown, that worked with Selznick at this time, saw her read and then suggested that she read for Selznick. And anyway, he ends up signing her, and he actually wanted her to do Claudia, but she ends up not doing it because the playwright didn't like her for the part and really wanted Dorothy McGuire. At first they thought Dorothy McGuire wasn't going to be available. So then there is no suitable project for her for a couple of years, so Selznick has her in New York going through intensive training, he claims, where she's taking, diction and elocution lessons and acting lessons, and there's a theater company that he's established just to train his players, and she performs in like a one-act play, plays the lead in it, and things like that.
Did she have an accent originally? She's from Oklahoma.
I have no idea. Nobody mentions any accents. But she and Robert Walker were not exactly rubes straight out of tent shows.
No.
As they've sometimes been portrayed. They met at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts.
Yeah.
Now, her parents did have a stock company from the Midwest, and her father ended up having a chain of movie theaters, and there's some thought that he had been instrumental in getting her first round of interviews in Hollywood, but of course that came to nothing except her Republic deal, which we did not cover in our podcast.
No, Dick Tracy's
Those roles.
G-Men.
Yeah, and then some Western with John Wayne before he'd been discovered by John Ford. And then he was involved in her career all the way up to the end with Tender is the Night. We did not realize that, but he actually had started producing that. Like A Farewell to Arms, it was a pet project that they had wanted to do for a long time, and he had started producing Tender is the Night and had prepared a script with the screenwriter, but at this time, he sold his film rights, his feature film rights, to his back catalog to television, and the British theater owners were not happy with that. And so they threatened to boycott all his future productions, so he couldn't produce anything else.
Oh, that's weird.
Well, this is the reason he gave for not producing it, for ending it at that point. So what he ended up doing was what he called packaging it, which is that he had a signed star and he had a script, and he sold them both together. Yeah. Now, which he did numerous times.
With Hitchcock, especially, he had a director and property that he put together and sent them off to Universal or one of the other studio. Fox, I guess, was Lifeboat.
Right, and he did this with Joan Fontaine on Jane Eyre. He did it with Dorothy McGuire on Claudia. Right. He did it all the time. The overall trajectory of their relationship together is in fact kind of the professional relationship together is kind of a dire one, in that, so he had to liquidate his first production company that made Gone with the Wind because the profits from Gone with the Wind and Rebecca were enormous, but he had really no way to access them without liquidating the company in order to make more films. I don't know how this all works. All of his prefaces are in this business speak that I fully do not understand. That's what he says. And then the second production company that made Duel in the Sun and Portrait of Jenny, well, Duel in the Sun sort of maybe broke even because of all of the money that he spent on advertising, and Portrait of Jenny didn't do anything. And it was at the end of this period that finally he and Jones decided to get married. He finally made the decision to leave his wife after Jones tried to kill herself at the end of Duel in the Sun because he wouldn't.
Horrible.
She actually made one of her first, as far as we know, documented suicide attempts, because she made many more.
Oh, man.
During her lifetime, and was discovered by chance by a friend.
I'm glad there were no volcanoes handy.
Yeah, I guess that shocked him into action.
Good.
Yeah, whatever, at this point. So they get married right as his second production company is going under, and the last two films they made together seem to have, ruined both of their careers. Of course, now both of them, and particularly Portrait of Jenny, seem like masterpieces, right?
Unfortunately, no one...
Not appreciated at the time.
We need to go back in time and tell them these are going to be great masterpieces of the cinema. Feel good about them.
And of course, Duel in the Sun, it's almost, remember that period when David Lynch, after Twin Peaks, everybody just hated everything that he did? Selznick was like due for a backlash after the phenomenal successes of Gone with the Wind and Rebecca.
More often than not, that is the pattern of critical reception.
And Duel in the Sun, because of its, unusually for the time, because every critic commented on it, sexual nature, and also everyone knowing that this affair was going on with the star, and also the crazed, over-the-top performances that Selznick and Vidor were going for stylistically, especially Jennifer Jones's, Like Fire Walk With Me, was crying out to be the object of the backlash.
And it got it.
It sure as hell got it. And they got their first really big whipping. At this point, he finally gets his divorce from Irene Selznick, they get married, Selznick decides, I'm taking a break from producing. And that's when they go off traveling through Europe, Jennifer Jones looking for work as an actress, and Selznick getting into co-producing.
And interfering.
And interfering because he doesn't really have a creative job anymore of his own. So all he can do is interfere in his co-productions and his wife's movies, or both when they're both. So the first of these co-productions that's also his wife's movie is Gone to Earth. And I actually looked at the sections dealing with it in one of Michael Powell's biographies. I think it's called $1 Million Movie. He hates Selznick just absolutely beyond description. He has utter contempt for him. And he adored and worshipped Jennifer Jones. So that part was good to know, because certainly Gone to Earth, which is a masterpiece, comes off as a movie tailored to the actress's gifts and personality.
Yes.
Right? And he did definitely, he thought she was just, well, I'm actually going to get the quote that he gave to the press when they were, the British press, when they were casting aspersions on her, although actually she was very well, she got very good reviews for the film, but the film itself, as weird as it is, did not get good reviews in the British press, but she generally did. But anyway, what does he say here?
Well, maybe Powell and Pressburger were riding for a fall by that point as well. They had had hit after hit after hit in the 40s. It usually is cited as the turning point for them, even though that is ridiculous because it's one of their best.
So in a 1950 interview, Powell said, "What a beautiful woman, great-hearted girl, inspired actress, restless soul." The other director who seems to have a lot of very good things documented to say about her is King Vidor.
Of course.
Yeah. Although, a weird detail that I found out with no context in this Paul Green book was that Joan Fontaine was originally supposed to play Ruby Gentry.
Well, I'm glad that didn't happen.
What a terrible, terrible idea.
Well, I know that Joan Fontaine...
Oh, she's the one who rejected it, according to the uncited source.
Okay, well, that's good that she had that, because in the late 40s and early 50s, you do see her, she's trying desperately to get away from this wallflower that she was so good at playing, but there are limits. And I think that would have been a terrible movie.
She decided that that would be one of them. Oh, but you know something else I found out about casting I thought you'd like, Dave? Jones was... Actually, Duel in the Sun was originally an RKO project. Jennifer Jones was not the first actress considered for the role. The first actress considered for the role was Teresa Wright, because she was, at the time, married to the author of a novel who adapted the screenplay. I actually think Teresa Wright would have been fantastic.
She is one of the great actresses as well. Another person that we want to do.
Yeah, and obviously that goes to show that Teresa Wright was also wanting to get away from her girl next door.
Well, the same year persona. She made Pursued, right? Which is a noir western. Yeah. With Mitchum.
So, you know what? If anyone could be as good in that role as Jennifer Jones, it would be Teresa Wright. Now, let's see. Where was I in all of this? What else did I want to convey to you, Dave, and to our listeners? Powell also gives some hot gossip. Jennifer Jones lived until 2009, when she was 90, or 93, according to some sources. So Powell's biography, this particular biography, was published long after Selznick was dead, but Jennifer Jones was still alive. Anyway, he tells a story of the production of Gone to Earth, in which Jennifer Jones, who we remember this movie was actually filmed on her and Selznick's honeymoon. They had just gotten married, where she got drunk on too much ale that she didn't realize was alcoholic. I don't know about that. Anyway, she got really drunk on ale one night in a pub and became a possessed demon. She got blackout drunk and just started cursing everybody, but according to Powell, especially taught him some new words related to her feelings about David Selznick and how horrible and controlling and repugnant he was. But it sounds more like Michael Powell talking about David Selznick. So I'm not saying this didn't happen, but he does report many years after the fact a long and detailed speech that may not be an exact transcription of what really
Or he remembered it because it jibed so completely with his own hatred.
Anyway, they were not having a good time, and it makes sense because 2 homes had been wrecked and 2 careers weren't going so well at this point. But after their tour of Europe, during which Selznick disastrously interfered in every production that she got involved in, it does seem like maybe the relationship stabilized after they came back to America and bought John Gilbert's old mansion.
Oh boy.
And settled down. Other things I learned about Jennifer Jones: she was a real kook. Surprise, surprise. She seems to have been into Eastern mysticism long before it was fashionable in the 60s. Sadly, there was nothing in the Peter Green book about her studying with Catherine Dunham, which I remain very interested in. Although, after Farewell to Arms, she was really drubbed by the critics in that one, and, she was always very insecure about her acting, and she thought that she might need to retire. She was so shaken by the critical reaction to that performance. She got some private lessons from Lee Strasberg at that point, right toward the end of her career. But nothing about Catherine Dunham in this one. She talked about her performances as going into a sort of yogi trance, during which she would just become the character, basically. And many of her co-stars, who often seemed to not have known at all what to make of her, as well as some of her directors, said that, yes, that is exactly what it was like working with her. She was in a trance whenever she was acting, and she also just transported herself into the character and really seemed to have no awareness of her surroundings, including the people she was acting with. And I've actually commented on that as a characteristic of her performances, how she seems to be, especially early on, completely in her own world, and how Joseph Cotton in particular is very good at
giving her the space.
Giving her the space for that. Not so much actually joining her in her world, but being in his own world next to her world, and the 2 worlds communicating across this space.
Yeah, it's true.
That's the particular quality of their pairing that I love so much. Oh, and apparently, in Dale Cooper fashion, she would prepare for scenes in Gone to Earth by doing yoga that would involve standing on her head. Just a couple more tidbits of note. The author of Clooney Brown, which was a very admired novel, sold the film rights only on the condition that Jennifer Jones play the part, keeping in mind that this was during her first bloom after Song of Bernadette, where she was very much...
Yeah, well, she had won the Oscar for 1943.
Yes, it was a very young and new actress to be winning an Oscar. Before the bloom came off of both of them with Duel in the Sun. Oh, Duel in the Sun, incidentally, Powell's hatred of Selznick seemed to have been originally formed based on the fact that he and Pressburger visited the set of Duel in the Sun, and according to Powell, Selznick forced him to watch the rape scene and endless footage of Jones crawling up the mountain, bloody and torn.
Okay.
Powell extrapolated from this that this Selznick was getting aroused by this in a sort of, little boy reading a comic book manner.
But why did he need Michael Powell there to complete the arousal?
I don't know, unless he was just showing this to everybody. I have no idea. But so when Selznick said that he was going to recut Gone to Earth, in contrast to what we heard at the Royal screening about Selznick not liking the way it presented his wife as too sexual, Powell speculated that he wanted to make it more sexual. or in that particular way, the particular sadistic little boy way.
Right.
And apparently, I did read one article online that compares the two versions and says that the wild heart scenes inserted by Selznick, with Mamoulian directing, a lot of them do seem to have the same type of sexuality projected by Jones as in Duel in the Sun, but I don't know what that exactly means without watching them.
One day we'll have to watch it.
Well, it is, of course, notable that Selznick never makes a movie like that with her again, so it doesn't seem like he was especially fixated on presenting her that way.
No.
In Duel in the Sun, right? Not surprisingly, I found out that among the roles that she chose for herself that Selznick told her not to do was Good Morning, Miss Dove, because of course he's always concerned with presenting his actresses, even though at this point it was his wife and not his actress, but it was still his actress.
Don't go middle age.
Exactly. Before your time, especially at this sensitive late 30s period in your career, but she was like, no, I want to do this. Oh, the first choice for that role was Olivia de Havilland, who would have been good, and who would have brought much more of a human touch, unlike Jennifer Jones's fascinating inhuman touch.
Yeah, that's what I like the most about that movie, though.
She's a complete alien in it.
Yes.
More casting stuff. So, Dorothy McGuire, before she performed in Claudia, understudied Martha Scott in Our Town.
Right.
As you know,
Teresa Wright also.
Teresa Wright understudied McGuire when she took over the role. So a connection here between Dorothy McGuire and Teresa Wright.
Great.
Both of them actresses that we want to do. And, of course, connected to Jennifer Jones.
All my favorites are connected.
See, you know...
I have the same type as David O.
Selznick. Yeah, so do I, apparently.
Except I don't like Gone with the Wind, and he wasted a lot of his anima on it.
Yeah, and Vivien Leigh never was his type. He really got into what he actually wanted to do after Gone with the Wind.
Yeah.
Really expressing his own personal taste after he got that out of the way. In all sorts of ways.
Was there nothing on Since You Went Away?
Well, what do you want to know about Since You Went Away? Speaking of David O. Selznick being interested in presenting stories about women.
Yeah, well, exactly. He wrote that screenplay, and it's the first one that he was responsible for that has Jennifer Jones in it. So I'd be interested if you found anything out about it.
I found out, well, first of all, there was gossip that he liked torturing Robert Walker by spending an inordinate amount of time on their love scenes and then taking Jennifer Jones off for private conferences in which he would sex her up. So that's not very pleasant. And we don't know if any of this is true.
There's no memo about that.
There's also the story I told about her hitting Selznick on the set of Terminal Station reappears in the Green Book as a story of her hitting Desika, so who knows who she hit? Maybe everybody. But so you can't, this production gossip, you can't take any of it very seriously.
No, I don't.
The only other thing I found out, obviously, was that he intended Jones's role in Since You Went Away, where she has this crush on this older man, Joseph Cotton, to starkly contrast with Song of Bernadette. So already he didn't want her to be typecast as a saint forever.
Right.
And also he, developed the role for her, and at the expense of Shirley Temple's role, because Shirley Temple was extremely popular at the time. But from what he's saying in his memos during this production, it seemed to have at least as much to do with the fact that he just didn't want the Selznick brand to be associated with the popularity that teenage Shirley Temple had. He wanted his quality stars.
Yeah, well, I should hope so.
More prominent.
So he brings her back in I'll Be Seeing You. Again, it's a secondary role, but she's kind of aged a little bit more into the Jennifer Jones, but she's not nearly as thoughtful as Jennifer Jones, and I don't know, she wasn't that popular in the early 40s. She had... According
to Selznick, she was all the rage just when they were making Since You Went Away.
Well, that doesn't make any sense, because she wasn't a child anymore, and her last big movie of the child period was a failure, The Blue Bird.
He had Gallup people doing research.
Oh, well, sure. I'm sure they still had name recognition for Shirley Temple, but I don't think people were ever desperate to see her act when she wasn't a child anymore. She did get...
Read the memos.
Yeah.
Refer to the memo. Anything else you want to know before I close with this?
No, I think that's good.
That's pretty exhaustive, right?
Yes.
I was going to go there with this. The other rabbit hole I went down was... I don't even know how I landed on this page, but I landed on... Maybe because I was thinking I should give David Thomson another chance and
Why would you do that?
actually read his Selznick book, which apparently he published in 1992, his Selznick bio, because it's the only bio of Selznick out there. I landed on this page, which was Thomson's Guardian obit of Jennifer Jones, where he compares her to Brittany Murphy. Their two pictures are at the top of the page, despite the fact that Jennifer Jones lived to the age of 90 or 93. And, had a long career working almost exclusively with auteur directors on prestige projects.
Well, I love Brittany Murphy, so I don't take offense to that.
Where is the comparison?
Well, maybe as personalities or...
No. Apparently, according to him, it's because they were both starlets.
Oh, well.
Who were destroyed and made to suffer by Hollywood.
No, I hate that guy.
So, this is the most mean-spirited, nasty, bitchy thing passing as film criticism.
He's cancelled.
I have ever read in my life, and I was so shocked by it because of that one comment he made at the time Portrait of a Lady with Nicole Kidman was released that Jennifer Jones was the only actress who could ever have played Isabel Archer. I thought he was a Jones ally. I thought he was a Jones supporter, and to read this was just... and I'm sure that's why I clicked on it. And The Guardian, incidentally. What is with The Guardian thinking that film criticism is clickbait?
Well, that's what all newspapers think.
Which they did again recently with that There Will Be Blood personal feminist essay that blew up all over Twitter for one day.
Oh, yeah.
This is The Guardian's idea of film, but at least that woman was laughed off of the internet, and David Thomson should be laughed off of the face of the earth.
Oh, if anyone deserves to be laughed away, it is David Thomson.
How did this man ever rise to this position of authority? Do you have any relationship, like authority within film criticism? Do you have any relationship with the biographical dictionary of film?
When I worked at a bookstore, I flipped through it. I probably read most of it over the years, but I never enjoyed any of it.
Yeah, it was like a hate read.
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't have ever paid money for it.
Now, I've wanted to, that I've wanted to tell this story since we started this film version of the podcast, but I didn't want to just gratuitously attack critics, because then the whole podcast could become about that. But now he's pissed me off. He's triggered me. My experience with Thomson was in my early 20s. So Guy had a copy of the Biographical Dictionary of Films. I just, as you do, I just picked it up and started reading it one night. I think Guy actually provoked me. He actually said, I want you to read this and tell me what you think of this. So I want you to tell me what you think of this guy. I start reading it and I'm, going to the familiar auteurs. The only entry I actually, because I'm in my early 20s, I hardly know anything about film. The only entry I actually remember of what he said was the Hitchcock entry, because Hitchcock was my favorite director at that moment. And night after night for a week, as soon as I get home from university, I'm reading this book. I just have this terrible compulsion to keep reading it, although I hate every word of it, every line of it. I'm so angry, like everything he's saying, because he just has this bitchy and dismissive way, and yet at the same time really personal and pointed way of taking down any figure that he thinks needs it. So basically taking down the most famous auteurs in the nastiest way possible, and then, Jennifer Jones, I think, is just like a casualty kind of his fixation with David Selznick, probably.
I guess so.
And after a week of this, I can't stand it anymore. So I just, one night I just jump up off of the couch. I go flying past Guy, and I'm like, I'm going to throw this book in the garbage. I hope you're okay with that. He's like, yeah, sure, go ahead. So I ran into the kitchen with our giant kitchen garbage pail that we bought when we got married, and threw the Biographical Dictionary of Film into it. The only time I have ever thrown a book in the garbage. I have thrown books across the room in anger before.
Well, there's one Goodreads review of my novel Hypocritic Days, where the author of the review threw my book in the garbage, so...
Yeah, well, that was for political reasons.
Probably.
But Thomson was just for reasons of being infuriating. But then the next day I felt kind of bad, because even though he sort of agreed to it, I didn't feel like I had his enthusiastic consent to throw out the Thomson book, and throwing out somebody else's book is like a serious offense. Also, I thought maybe I was wrong, and maybe the book made me so angry because...
It cut too deep.
It actually had value to it, that was a sign of its value. So I fished it out of the garbage the next day and put it back on the shelf, but I never read it again. But now I want to say that, yeah, My 20-year-old self was correct. In the first place, the book does not have any value.
I want all of you to go to your bookshelves, take your copy of David Thomson and throw it in the trash.
He has nothing of value to say as an analytical critic, and he certainly is not a scholar, as Jonathan Rosenbaum, who is, has pointed out.
I'm mad as hell at David Thomson, and I'm not going to take it anymore.
And his distinctive feature is just being bitchy about famous people.
Well,
that's it.
Yeah.
No, I'm going to end by reading a memo, and then that's the end of this episode.
Okay.
One memo from David O. Selznick. Get ready for this, Dave. December 11th, 1941, to Miss Catherine Brown.
4 days after Pearl Harbor.
Immediately upon your... This is all caps, by the way. He doesn't always do a memo in all caps, but this is all caps. Immediately upon your receipt of this wire, please drop everything and rush over to the Hayes office to register Mein Kampf, as well as anything else necessary to protect it, such as Life of Adolf Hitler and My Life by Adolf Hitler. I hope that there will be no nonsense about whether this is copyrighted or non-copyrighted work, and I hope the Hayes office has the good sense to realize that I consider it non-copyrighted and have no intention of buying rights or of paying royalties, which in circumstances would of course be ridiculous. Even before we were at war, publishers considered it in these terms. Keep it utterly secret until I've had opportunity to check with Washington on the making of this film. Oh my god, he's really deep into the Benzedrine during this. Will await wired word from you, but better address me to my home to further guard secrecy. And please caution not to leave any wires concerning it around the desks, and not to even discuss it with people in our own organization. For purpose of wires and letters, suggest you refer to it as Tales from History.
Code name.
Tales from History. To point out importance of treatment, I plan for subject, I am thinking about Hecht for script, and Hitchcock for direction, but don't want anything said, even to these two, and apparently nothing was ever said.
Instead, they made Since You Went Away. Well, I'm glad that didn't happen. I don't see how
that was just a middle of the night panic attack from David O. Selznick.
I don't really feel like that would have been a valuable propaganda effort.
Unlike, but he actually had the sense not to make it, unlike Jerry Lewis when he became addicted to painkillers.
Oh, God.
He actually made The Day the Clown Cried. He didn't show it.
The drug-addled mind tends to go to the Nazis.
That makes perfect sense.
That's it for this week. Next time, it's Hollywood Studios Year by Year, Warner Brothers, 1932, Life Begins, and I Am a Fugitive from a Chain Gang.
What is Life Begins again?
Maternity Ward.
Is that one we've seen before? Oh, that's a really good film.
It's a very interesting movie directed by James Cruz.
Yeah.
So, see you then.
Be great.